That was probably my most stressful campaign of my entire career.
Payflex faked a data breach for a Black Friday campaign.
The C-suite always says, well, the first thing you're going to pull back is budget that you can't track. And then nothing happened after 6 months. Of course, nothing happens after 6 months. People don't use Payflex functionally. They are signaling identity. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want their individuality to shine. Radical honesty is risky. Radical honesty is imperative. I don't know if I'd do it again, but it was a good experience.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Scratch. I am joined by Tracey-Lee Zurcher-Campbell, the CMO of Payflex. Payflex, if you've heard about them, and if you haven't, they are South Africa's biggest and most prominent buy now, pay later service. They are really dominating that space and have been for some time now, but not only through an exceptional product, but actually through some just like really bold, cutting edge marketing that they're doing. And that's really what we get into in today's conversation with Tracey-Lee. Now, Tracey's background spans everything from tobacco, defense, and now buy now, pay later. So she has a really, really interesting take on what it means to work in, brands which are typically viewed in a very negative light with a bad reputation, and how you actually tackle that and create a marketing platform and a brand platform that really allows you to cut through in the market. She has an incredible position on this idea of radical honesty being the right marketing strategy, and something which I just thought was really compelling, especially in today's day and age. We talk a lot about actually her approach to how she balances data and brand building itself, and making sure that she's able to sell in good ideas that actually get, convey the emotional benefit, but also understand the functional benefit for customers, and still get the board behind it as well without having to worry every single moment about the numbers of it all. She gives some great advice to up and coming CMOs who are in a similar position, and really speaks to how the superpower for her has been leaning into understanding the language of finance and being able to attribute the things that matter most when it comes to brand and brand building to her CFO. So that's a really, really interesting part of it. And then the final part of our conversation really centers around her framework and one of the most fundamental marketing skills that she believes every marketer needs, which is the ability to write a brief properly. She talks about how it's a pet peeve in marketing of hers now that, a lot of times we'll just put things out for the sake of marketing without actually thinking about the objective in mind first. So she gives her framework on exactly how to do this. I'm not going to give the whole framework away here, but she refers to it as a tattoo on your hand, which is the acronym WAWTTA. And I'll let you get into the episode to find out what that exactly means. But yeah, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode with Tracey-Lee of Payflex. Tracey, welcome to Scratch. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, you're part of one of the pioneering contingents of South African brand CMOs who we're having on the show in recent months. So I think you joined the likes of the CMO of Standard Bank, Investec, Bootlegger, and a couple of really other cool brands that we've had on so far. So really trying to understand more about that South African market. And yeah, one of the brands that everyone keeps talking about whenever we ask them their favorite challenger brands in South Africa, it's usually one of two. It's either you guys like Payflex or Checkers. So yeah, very, very excited to have you on the show today and talk about what you've been building over there.
Amazing. That's music to my ears.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to start immediately with the icebreaker that we ask every CMO who comes on Scratch. And naturally, we are rival. We always talk about challenger brands and the challenger playbook. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is your favorite challenger brand currently that you're passionate about and you can't nominate yourself?
I did write a whole story about how fabulous Payflex was. But in this case, I would say at the moment, my favorite challenger brand is GoTime. This used to be Time Bank. They recently rebranded to GoTime to be more aligned to their kind of international counterparts. And They are looking super sexy. I'm loving all the hype they're making, the new colors, the new vibe. I know quite a few people in Go Time. I think they've done a fantastic job and they've certainly set the bar. So we're coming for you.
Yeah, they're awesome. I think it's Raymond over there is the CMO, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
he did an amazing keynote for us at one of our first events in Cape Town, actually, that we did for Rival. It's going back to November of last year, I think even earlier than that. But an incredible keynote about how GoTime is building and like what they're building exactly within the South African market. And it's a really interesting story. So yeah, definitely a big fan of them. We need to have them on the show at some point soon as well. Great choice. Okay, cool. And then you said you had prepared a great overview of Payflex. So why don't you tell everyone what Payflex actually does for those that might not know?
No problem. So Payflex we're the first to market in South Africa, the first buy now, pay later. We launched officially in 2018, and we saw huge tailwinds in COVID as it was primarily launched online. We are also in over 4,000 retailers online and in-store in South Africa. And essentially what we offer is installment-based payment plans that are 100% interest-free. So this makes buying purchases that feel slightly out of your budget a lot more manageable, and you don't have to pay any interest. I think the number one question that we get is, how is that possible? How do you make any money if you don't charge your customers any interest? And I suppose the myth dispeller here is that it is the merchants pay us slightly more than a standard transaction fee for us to be able to fund that. So it's a volume game at the end of the day.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And you've answered one of my personal questions about the space, actually, because I just used for the first time ever a buy now, pay later service because I saw it was 0% spread out over installments and I don't pay anymore. So I thought, well, yeah, of course, I'm going to keep the money in my pocket and pay it off on 0%. But I just couldn't figure out how they were making money. But that makes a lot of sense now. So I appreciate the explanation. I mean, buy now, pay later, the minute you say that, I feel like consumers today, they kind of retract a little bit. There is this active, I guess the best way to put this is like an active distrust almost of the category now. Don't know where that's come from. That's come from a lot of, I guess, looking at it from a consumer lens, like a lot of bad headlines about some of the biggest players in the market globally. But you've actually kind of built a whole career, building brands in these very controversial categories. Most marketers tend to get one controversial category in a lifetime. You've done tobacco, defense, and now fintech, and specifically in the buy now, pay later angle of fintech. So you've had quite a few goes at this. What does operating in those spaces really teach you about marketing, and like what can't you learn operating in a safe CPG brand, let's say?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, your immediate response was, what's the catch? Is this a scam? Oh, they're trying to make me default and that's how they make their money. From a buy now, pay later point of view, it's super important that we as marketers understand the real pain point and the real feelings that people have towards a brand in their kind of consideration phase of the customer experience journey. So, if you're selling baby clothes, it's kind of, you can follow these kind of broad narrative arcs around the human experience and you'll largely be correct. Whereas within a category that is a little bit controversial, there's a lot of discussion and debate around over-indebtedness in South Africa. It's super important to understand really what people feel, really what they think, and to be able to express and dispel any kind of myths so that the trust factor increases significantly. So I think, I have had, as you say, quite a lot of experiences working within categories that have a lot of debate around them. And it's the depth of category and the real human motivators that are, it's important to be able to get a good grasp of that so that you can holistically reframe it for the public. especially as a brand new category in South Africa in 2018. I've only been at Payflex for 3 years. I haven't been there since inception, but you can definitely see that the trust factor towards buy now, pay later over the last 3 years that I've been involved in this industry, not necessarily because of me, but just from industry and category building, the understanding and trust has certainly increased over time. So it is becoming a more normalized industry in South Africa, very much like kind of Klarna and Afterpay. It's totally normal in Europe. So that's where we're hoping to get to.
And how do you build that trust? Like what are kind of the key levers that you're pulling on right out of the gate? When you first entered the category and you first entered this business, what did you kind of see as like, okay, 90 days, this is what needs to get done? Maybe a bit longer than 90 days because it takes longer than that to build trust.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm a big believer in design thinking. So I mean, there are many frameworks and methods that marketers or anybody could use, but it's really important for me to be able to deeply understand the customer psyche. So they call it Gemba walking, or going into the Gemba, spending time with the customers, getting those vox pops, doing customer brand awareness research, retention research, understanding what their core drivers and motivators are, what makes them tick, and what are those pain points, and really mapping them, in quite a detailed fashion. So if I understand that and I know what channels they're coming into contact with our brand, over I suppose over their journey from awareness through to kind of brand advocacy, I can reinforce through consistent messaging and dispel any kind of mistrust that they might have towards not only the brand, but the category in general. There's a little bit of a co-opetitive vibe that buy now, pay laters in South Africa have. We all work together to try and build category understanding and trust because it benefits all of us, and then we'll fight it out in the ring afterwards.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? Like working together with your competitors to bring the whole category up. That makes sense.
Yeah.
In terms of you mentioned obviously that consistent messaging. Is there a red thread which runs through that consistent messaging? Is there a particular angle that you're taking? I know you had mentioned this idea, I think I'd heard about it, this idea of like radical honesty being the right marketing strategy. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So, I think we have to lead, especially when a brand or a category is still kind of growing. It's important to drive home functional benefits. So the functional benefit for Payflex and for many others is that it is completely interest-free. There's a lot of misunderstanding around brands that charge very high interest rates and kind of have revolving credit facilities that call themselves buy now, pay later. So it's really important that functional benefit is upfront and center all the time. So the way I see it is not so much as, being that radical honesty is risky. I think radical honesty is imperative. And I think the problem is in an environment where there are so many, there's so much debate and discussion. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. It's there's a lot of debate in the news. Is that you have to be equally vocal and visible. So you have to be kind of coming to the fore, bringing your arguments forward, and being visible in front of customers with your rebuttal all the time. So I don't see it as trying to justify doing something wrong. I try and explain why it is actually right.
Yeah, I saw the latest data set that came out about the fact that actually the buy now, pay later services, and specifically for Payflex, was being used the most around the time when bonuses were dropping in South Africa in February and March. And actually it was a really interesting data point to see that, when people actually have the most money in their account, that's when they're using these services, not when they're kind of, really struggling for cash maybe in January, because I think you coined the term January is really a real thing. And I quite like that because I think everyone globally feels that, post Christmas and all of that. So, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And do you feel, have you found it very difficult to sometimes find the right angle to come back with that rebuttal? Like, is there a principled stance that you take, or is there a way, I guess, a framework that you guys use internally with your team to say, okay, like this has come out, this negative piece of news about us, here's how we need to address it? Or is it always like you have the same messaging and the same party line that you kind of stick towards?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both. We certainly have our hymn sheet that we all try and sing from, and not that these are these are not spin lines. That there are it's truthful lines about what Payflex and the industry is all about, who we service, who we do not service. Who we are targeting and who we do not target. It's really important that there is a consistent narrative that is fed into the public and into the media. But by the same token, there's always interesting points that come up, and then we might sit and reflect together as a team to try and understand how we can best communicate this to people that are not necessarily fintech or finance fundies. We have to humanize it and make it accessible for those people. So we would have a discussion. So, for example, regulation for buy now, pay later, it's very much on the horizon. We are quite familiar with what is required and working avidly towards being whatever the compliance and regulation is going to look like. We would like to make sure that we are compliant. But there's a lot of noise about this in the media. And often a lot of it is misinformation, so it's new, and we always have to kind of regroup and make sure that we're saying whatever we need to say that's for new arguments that come out there.
Now, I want to touch on something you mentioned just there, because I think this kind of leads on nicely. You mentioned obviously having the functional angle, but actually you're balancing quite well the functional benefit, but also the, emotional benefit quite clearly in a lot of the messaging that I've seen, at least.
Good.
Like, I know that you mentioned, I think you mentioned as well that there's this idea of, how do you actually, as a marketer, how do you identify what the functional benefit is and then the emotional benefit? So how have you kind of approached that at buy now, pay later with Payflex? Like, how have you done that?
Yeah, so we actually followed quite a rigorous, a process of trying to understand what the brand essence really is. And for us, it's important that we have, we'll have a Venn diagram of the three kind of main criteria that speak to how to get to our sustainable competitive advantage. So first is our kind of unique brand insights. What are the kind of key obvious functional benefits that the brand has to offer that nobody else does? More importantly for me is our customer needs. We've been in the market for a few years now. We have a sizable customer base that we can access, and we can really get into their heads. What are their needs? What are their desires, motivators, drivers? What are their pain points? What could we be solving for? And then, of course, the third is the kind of competitive environment. What else is out there, and how do we make sure that we have parity with competition and differentiators? So, for me, we went through this process of really understanding each and every part. What are our brand values? What's the personality? What is the essence? And ultimately, what we got to is people don't necessarily use Payflex functionally. They use the brand or they use the product because they're trying to achieve something that's higher on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's self-actualization. We're talking about people that are signaling identity. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want their individuality to shine. These are not people, and this is often also a misconception, because people talk about, how can you do this? As there's over-indebtedness in South Africa, how can you perpetuate that? It's unethical. It's not the case at all, because those are not the people that we would even allow to use the product, because they would be too risky, and we don't want to perpetuate a cycle of debt. We want to enable people who can already afford to pay us back, to have the lifestyle of their dreams, to do things and buy things that make them feel like they can be who they really are right now and not have to wait 10 years, until they have a sizable retirement pot. They can do both, and we will enable that. So that emotional need that's right at the top of the hierarchy, it's not, safety and security, it's actualization. So when you understand that customer need and you're solving for an emotional problem, it becomes really clear how your product needs to change and meet those needs of the market.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, especially given today's shape of the market and what demographics look like now. I think,
Exactly.
20 years ago, we would have just taken a basic data set and said, okay, it's female aged this, between these ages, have this much income, and these are the types of jobs they work in. I think today that's become a lot more nuanced, hasn't it? Like, There's a lot more focus on microcultures, people who you could have a teenager in Ohio and a grandfather in London, for example, and they're both into Korean dramas, for example. So like they that overlap has become so strange, but actually it's like it's a microculture which you can identify and then market to, because actually what they're looking for is kind of now the same thing. This convergence is quite a strange moment for marketers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know we'll speak about one of the campaigns that Payflex has done, but I do want to kind of keep going on this idea of like really trying to figure out now like creative boldness and commercial rigor, because I know data is a really important thing for definitely you as a CMO, but Payflex generally as a brand. So I do want to touch on that. So I know most CMOs today are a bit allergic to campaigns that they can't directly attribute. And I don't think it's the CMO's fault mostly. It's usually because they have to like report into a board who's looking to see what the growth has been over the last quarter and like whether that campaign that they spent all that money on was worth it. Now, you and I both know as marketers that some of those most effective brand moments don't always like convert into like a really pretty dashboard that looks like the line is going up into the
they
right.
They never convert into the dashboard.
So how have you found that process, both over your career, but also at Payflex specifically? How have you made that case to get the buy-in for work, which is, inherently more difficult to measure, the more creative stuff?
Yeah, I think that it's probably the one question that probably every marketer or CMO that spans marketing and brand will have to grapple with at some point in their career. And the earlier you can get an understanding of how to make the case and how to sell this, because you're not selling it to people that understand brand. You're selling it to people that understand money. So you have to be able to translate this kind of concept of something that's a little bit touchy-feely, it's a little bit emotional, into a language that financial people can understand. So I'll always look at the indicators of brand success. So, things like brand recall, brand recognition, salience, those types of metrics, and I'll measure them over and over and over again. So we go out into the field, we get a kind of sizable sample of, respondents, and then we have an understanding of how the brand is actually tracking. Because if you can see your salience metrics are going down, and you can see the underlying performance metrics that feed into salience, then you can make the case to say, well, if salience is going down in the market, that means that at the point of purchase, when a customer has to make a decision of which, not only buy now, pay later method to use, but which payment method to use, if it's going down, we know there's a very strong indicator that our sales are going to go down. So for brands, if you are investing in a brand, say now we're investing a huge amount and next year something happens, and of course, the C-suite always says, well, the first thing you're going to pull back is budget that you can't track. And then we go, well, first thing we're going to go is take brand budget away. And then they go, well, nothing happened. Nothing happened after 6 months. Of course, nothing happens after 6 months. It can take up to 2 years for a brand's the metrics to go down, and then it'll start hitting the sales lines, and then you are really in trouble, because to get that back, you've got to invest 2 to 3 times that amount. So to make this case, I will often use examples of other brands that have seen this kind of budgetary, that there are many examples that you can find. Harvard Business Review often publishes cases like this where they've reduced budget, and 2 years later, their sales and revenue are tanking. So, when you have that data to kind of show a financial person what can happen when you don't invest in brand, it becomes a lot more digestible for them. And by the same token, we will also always continue to do performance campaigns that do have a brand element. So in any effect, there will be some kind of support in that regard. And you can kind of see even if it's not a direct conversion, you can see plausible causation. I spoke to a lady she was previously at Uber and Uber Eats, and they had done a geographical campaign, which was out of home. Out of home is notoriously difficult to track, but they could see the uplift in sales and the downturn in sales in that area when they didn't have the billboards up in the area. So, those are good case studies and examples of tracking plausible causation. And I will often use that when I have to make a case of why I spend so much money on something.
Yeah, it's really an interesting time that we're living in. I do feel like, not to make any sort of prediction, but I feel that the tide is starting to move towards the understanding of brand and like why you should invest in brand, especially from non-marketing people. The reason being, like, you're just starting to see it more and more. And I think even if you consider, for example, the biggest companies in the world right now who are kind of having the biggest brand war, like OpenAI and Anthropic being the two examples, you're seeing that actually as we reach this place where effectively their models can do mostly the same stuff, like functionally, they just have brand to rely on. And you see them kind of really playing out the brand wars properly. Like you saw Anthropic Super Bowl ads, you see all the like good PR they're trying to put in the market as well. Like that's all brand and marketing play. Like that's not like they're not doing any like ads and performance stuff. Like there's probably no data behind like the Super Bowl ad. Definitely not. But that Super Bowl ad definitely did well for their brand sentiment as opposed to OpenAI. So it's a really interesting one. And I think that kind of, pushes people to understand it a bit more.
Yeah, I think also, there is a case to be made for the value of a brand as an intangible asset. If you go to market, if you were selling and you were being evaluated based on, the value of your intangible assets, brand plays to that. So, there's some of the most valuable brands in the world. It's all about brands and it makes their companies worth so much more. Yeah,
definitely so true. And I want to talk a little bit about a specific campaign, which I know Payflex did really, really well on, and it's the leaks campaign. Now, this one sounds like an absolute minefield to get signed off. Just to give everyone listening a bit of context, Payflex faked a data breach for a Black Friday campaign. But I would really like to understand and get under the hood of that, Tracy, and understand the insight that made you think that was going to work. And also how you sold that in. And finally, what advice would you give to another marketer who wants to take such a risk like that, but can't really get the board behind them?
Yeah. I must say that I think that was probably my most stressful campaign of my entire career to get my own head around. I think that, because we have, for example, we have over 4,000 merchants that we have to service, and we have to make them trust us to make sure that they felt comfortable with it. And, there was a little bit of a bridge between making it believable and not believable. But I think it was incredibly stressful, largely also from a brand protection point of view. But how I got it over the line in my own head first was that, Payflex is an innovator. Payflex was first to market. We saw the first mover advantage, and we've been innovating ever since. So we had to kind of leverage the idea of being progressive and edgy, and make sure that we're still kind of interesting and top of mind. So, and I think Black Friday, we have this debate every year around Black Friday. Is it worth doing the exercise around a Black Friday campaign? Because everyone's spending anyway. It's a monster of its own. So, investing a huge amount behind a Black Friday campaign, or just, riding on the coattails of the retailer's success, what was the point? So because there's so much noise around Black Friday, if we chose to invest, then we had to really stand out. We had to do something that was going to get people talking, and ultimately become the most salient brand at the point of checkout. So I thought that was the most justifiable way to get that over the line. And I think because of all how the brand is perceived, I think it went down very well. We had a great response from our customer base and our audience. But it also didn't come without its challenges. Like, we ran a campaign for April Fool's Day, I think it was last year or the year before, where we said you could pay for Lobola, which is culturally and locally very relevant with Payflex, and it was hysterical and people loved it. But there was also kind of a little bit of belief that maybe you can do this. Like, could it be possible? Is it possible that Payflex had a data breach or a leak on the deals for Black Friday? So we did have to navigate that a little bit, but thankfully it all worked out. I don't know if I'd do it again, but it was a good experience.
I think one of my best friends got married last year in South Africa to a South African lady, and he was telling me about this because someone had sent him the campaign, and he was like, I really wish this was real. So
maybe it's something we should put on our product roadmap for real.
Yeah. And so switching gears a little bit, that is obviously a very clearly a B2C campaign, but a lot of what Payflex does is getting into merchants, right? And making sure that Payflex is shown at the point of checkout and things like that. How do you kind of go about your B2B marketing in that sense? Like, how do you make sure that you're getting in front of these merchants and making sure that they want to have Payflex on their checkout?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And I think, we have different batches of merchants or different types of merchants. So some merchants see the very, very obvious appeal to offering Payflex as a payment product. It's often stores that have higher ticket items that's more difficult to convince a customer to make a payment. Like, for example, winter coat. Sometimes these can go from between 5,000 and 10,000 Rand, very expensive. Customer might come back to that PDP over and over again and not actually make the leap to checking it out. So they see the benefit themselves of showing Payflex as a payment option to disrupt that customer decision-making process and get them over the line. Then we have merchants that don't really understand it. They see the pain point there is margin. So they go, well, we have to pay an extra few percentage points just to offer Payflex for our customers. They probably would have bought anyway. How do we know this? So we have case studies on the uplift in sales and conversions as a result of implementing Payflex. Very important to keep that top of mind all the time, because that margin really does come into question if they don't immediately see the benefit. But we can clearly see over time that your uplift in revenue can go up to as high as 33% more than usual. So it's a continuous relationship building and education for the merchants that worry about that sort of thing, because we want them to see that it really does benefit their business as much as it does ours. And then you have the kind of grudge purchases. Their customers demand it. They don't necessarily believe it. They don't want it to cannibalize card payments, because card payments are obviously cheaper. And it's the same story. It's continuously showing them the benefit of the very loyal and large customer base that Payflex has. They can originate customers from this base if they take advantage of it. So you really have to also, it's the same with customers. You have to understand the mindset and psyche. The same with B2B customers. Understand the mindset, understand their pains and gains, and try and tailor our service offering a bit more to what they need to hear to display Payflex where it matters.
Switching gears slightly, and I think Lance did mention to you that we have a rival AMP WhatsApp community specifically for South Africa. Yeah. And this was a question which came from that community group. When we mentioned that we were going to have you on the show, there was a lot of fanfare, there was a lot of excitement about it. And great. One of the questions that came up was that, a lot of people in the group are already using Payflex, and they have a lot of questions around what is coming next. So Amazing. What kind of future promotions can customers expect? And could something like airlines realistically be part of that?
100%. So we do have some airline partners already. So, you can use Payflex if you book through certain partners. I think what's important to understand, and also especially because your AMP community is global, there is a different risk and credit appetite in, say, Europe, the US, Australasia, than there is to not only South Africa, but Africa. You go into different countries in Africa, the way credit or debt products are consumed and used vastly different country to country, and a credit risk profiling exercise really needs to be done on a very, very local level. So how somebody in, we're talking about, you can buy your enchilada on Uber Eats in London with Klarna. Yes, it's a different type of person. It's a different type of risk. Whereas here, I suppose rule of thumb is we don't want to be offering irresponsibly to customers who, there's no incentive for them to pay us back if they've already consumed something. So, our rule of thumb is you need to not be able to consume something before you've paid us back. So something like airlines, if you book an airline ticket and fly tomorrow and you've paid a third, but why would you bother paying the rest? It's a little bit of kind of a nuanced type of risk assessment that we might have in this country. And therefore things like grocery. It extends into travel, but not completely, because there are kind of ways and means of making it accessible that it's less risky. But we need to kind of protect our risk margin so that we can continue to offer an amazing product to as many customers as possible over time. If we, disregard our risk, we would, put our business in jeopardy, and that would put, the sales and opportunity for our merchants in jeopardy. We don't want to do that. So I would say, watch the space in categories that are not strictly retail. They might be higher value categories, things like aesthetic medicine, dentistry. It's still a product that consumers purchase, and there's still a pain point around price, but it's not buying it in a mall or online. So that's, I think, that's a new growth opportunity that we'd be looking into.
Okay, interesting. We'll watch the space and definitely make sure we share it with the group as soon as you have your new campaign around that stuff.
Cool.
So Tracy, one thing that I wanted to ask you, and this is kind of now drawing on, I guess, the perspective of your broad career across tobacco, defense, and now fintech. And one thing that kind of stood out to me was like actually coming into fintech and specifically technology, like there is this very clear pattern in tech companies where marketing is kind of thought of as an afterthought in a way, and not necessarily intentionally, but a lot of times it's like this adage of, oh, good product is all you need, and then the customers will come. Not necessarily true, but it is kind of the overarching theme that most tech companies today have. So how did you find breaking that pattern when you did come into, a scale up, which is quite different to what you had been in before?
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the adage. I see these images all the time on LinkedIn about product and marketing. If it's a good product, bad marketing. Is it a cheap or expensive failure, or a cheap or expensive win, depending on the combination? I think if you are not in marketing, the trick, the clue is in the name. We're talking about the market. So if you are, I see marketing as an advocate for the responsiveness of a market to something. So if you're developing a product and you're not asking the market about how it's going to feel about that, then you're missing 50% of, the information or insight that you need to actually develop your product. So yes, of course, people talk about, build it and they will come. And, the iPad, nobody ever thought touchscreens would be a thing, and now we can't live without a touchscreen. That does exist in a kind of blue ocean world, but largely in reality, most products exist in something of a red ocean. We have some kind of understanding of how customers feel about certain things, even if it's something that might be adjacent to an existing product or a spin on an existing product. We can get that information. So I think people always think of marketing as this kind of go-to market tactical approach, but you have to internally reframe what marketing really means. It's a representative of the market and being able to bring those insights in early. And I found that I've had to really insert myself sometimes quite aggressively, made me very unpopular at a time, but they'll thank you afterwards. So if you can, even if you just say, shove it in their face, this is the insight, use it or lose it, but I'm telling you, if you don't use it, it's going to fail. And we've seen it. I mean, I've seen in not only at Payflex, but in my career, where I've been brought in, not me, but the insights I have to offer, too late, the entire product strategy had to change because there was something that somebody didn't think about because they were thinking about it from a business point of view, not a customer point of view. And when I can bring an insight to say, you know what, guys, this is our number one customer demand by a country mile. Customers want this thing 7 times more than they want this next thing. We're able to prioritize our new product development, and we're able to deliver to customers what they want to kind of claim market share. And that's what's important. So when they see the win, then they'll believe you and bring you in. But you've just got to be a forceful about educating internally about what marketing really is.
This idea of starting with the end in mind seems to be kind of the common principle, both for you when you're kind of getting product and marketing aligned, but also when you're thinking about your own marketing campaigns and taking those things to market.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples that you could share with us where, potentially just on the marketing campaign side, your team maybe went to figuring out what the campaign should be before actually thinking of what the end result should be?
Yeah, so I looked at this question in advance, and there are so many examples of where this happens. And I think for me, and I have this discussion often with agency, is brief writing, the skill of brief writing is probably the most critical skill that you can develop as a marketer. So I say to my team, we need to have this tattooed on our hands before we actually start writing or typing a brief is it's like WATTWA, what are we trying to achieve here? So, if you can really master the art of brief writing and understanding really what your objective is first, that's actually how we stress test. So things, for example, like, we do these campaigns often just for the sake of doing them. Things like Hallmark retail moments, Mother's Day, Father's Day, even Black Friday, things like April Fool's Day. We pulled back an April Fool's Day campaign this year for multiple reasons, but it's because what we were trying to actually achieve was not clear. So that for me, we'll stop that before it goes to market, because that's for me so critical. But it also comes to product development. So Payflex is largely because of what it offers, because of that product. And if you haven't brought all of the stakeholders to offer their unique lenses, you don't necessarily really know what you're trying to achieve. You're only understanding what your division or your function needs to achieve to meet a business goal, but it doesn't necessarily meet a holistic goal. And therefore that problem statement might actually change somewhat. So I think getting in early, writing that brief really clearly, and getting all the stakeholders to participate in advance, that's where the win lives.
That's super interesting, and definitely one of those things which I think we're all guilty of, like, especially in the age of AI, when you can just say, I have a random idea, and then ask Claude or ChatGPT to churn out 5 different variations of it. A lot of times you're just being inundated with just ideas, but nothing which really hits the mark. So I think it's really important for all of us to kind of be focused on that. Okay, final question from me, Tracy. If you could go back and give one piece of advice to a marketer who's just stepping into their first CMO role, specifically within a scale-up, what's something that you wish someone had told you? What would that be?
So I saw the biggest change in my career when I understood the finances. So if you can go and really educate yourself on what is important from a financial point of view and what your CFOs are looking to hear, that's what's going to be the game changer. So marketers often go, we'll ROAS or ROMI. That's not really what they're looking at. They're interested. Yes, of course, it's got to be profitable. But if you can talk about the relationship between kind of customer equity, market share, customer lifetime value, and really understand what that means to a business, I would have started really focusing on that much earlier in my career.
Yeah, great advice. Definitely one of those things which I think every CMO in the room needs to know and be aware of now.
Yeah.
Great. So Tracy, I'm going to end on a quick lightning round, just really fast, rapid questions, and then I'll let you go.
Cool.
All right. If your brand were a pizza, what type of pizza would it be?
So I went with a pizza brand. So I would say Kolkakio in South Africa. Kolkakio is kind of an elevated pizza dining experience, but it's really accessible. There's loads of them around, and you can have a great time having that pizza when you are out shopping.
Awesome. What's the best campaign that you've seen recently?
So the one that I thought was absolutely fantastic was what Lego did. Everybody knows David Attenborough turned 100 years old, and Lego, I think the age range for Lego was 3 to 99, and they actually changed their age range so that so David Attenborough could keep playing Lego. And I saw Pineapple got on the bandwagon for that as well. Pineapple is represented by Halo. And they did an amazing campaign recently that I loved so much, which was their campaign for Capital Legacy, which was like that awkward last word before you die. So you kind of want to make sure that your kind of will and legacy is intact. So, there's billboards that say, no man, those prawns smell fine, or no man, tinfoil can go into the microwave. It was really funny, very relatable, very human.
Very cool. I'll have to check that campaign out. I didn't see that. I saw the Lego one, but not the Capital Legacy one, so I'll check that out. What's your biggest pet peeve in marketing?
Yeah, I've said it before, but my biggest peeve is when people come to me with work that they don't have a clear objective. So I always want to know, what are you trying to do and how are you going to do it?
Yeah. And final one, what's the biggest missed opportunity in marketing right now?
I'll be a bit frou-frou with this one. I think that everybody's going crazy about AI, including myself. I am very interested in how AI can change the game for us, what it can do, but I also am very conscious of what it can't do. And what I've not yet seen is amazing human creative brilliance from AI. And I think brands are going so heavy into using AI for everything, they're missing that human creativity. So I would just be mindful of that in the market.
Awesome. Well, Tracey, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a great show and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you guys.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.